preparing for another wonderful day. How wonderful is life? Is it? Or are you just going through the motions? Is there a feeling of vibrancy? Feeling really connected or disconnected? What's happening, folks? Is it possible to be vibrant all the time, or at least most of the time? Or is that too much? All right. Some good questions to ask ourselves. Better yet, for me to ask myself. All right. We welcome, as we do every day, to Tanya today. Welcome. Rabbi Ronnie Fine coming to you from Chabad Zich and Kadeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. And we share it with our Guten Tag with Michael in Germany. John, shalom to you in North Carolina, while Clem is making history in Brisbane, Australia. And fellow Canadian, Etienne, shalom to you in Canada. Elise is joining us. Boker Tov, Chaverim in West Virginia. And Rabbi is all the way in Morocco. Good afternoon to you. Lisa in the UK, blessings. Joseph is enjoying sunny and mild day in New Jersey. Well, we have Diane in Arizona, where the sun must have risen already. Erica in Norway, where the sun's probably setting soon. Welcome. Julia is in wintry, warm Pennsylvania, while David is in Gold River, California, where I guess winter just means what? Gotta put on a sweater sometimes. Mark Lozata in Poland. You should be gesund and well. Alice is yearning to learn. Oh, that's good. In Baltimore. While Davida and Liba, twin sisters, are having a joyous Boker Tov in New York. Louise is in Sydney, Australia, where it's very late at night. Welcome. Omak is in California. Blessings to you. And Anna in Chicago. All right. Boker Tov. Buenos dias to Geramo. Maybe I got that right there. In Mexico. Jackie is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Shalom. Lynn is in New Jersey joining us. No, or in Long Island, maybe. And today is Diane's father's 103rd birthday. A blessed memory. Wow. Rena Boker Tov in Colorado. Eugenia is in Calgary joining us. All right, beautiful. Clubhouses, we have Batya, Vilma, Michael, Adam, David, Marcy, Venus, Instagrammers. We have Alcoy in Lima, Peru. We have Lily in Israel. We have Astro, Carlos in Chile. We have Rachel in South Carolina. Saad, Penelope has joined us. Ketty, did I get that right? Or Kelty? Small print. Hard to see sometimes. Yenta Telebenta in New York has joined us. Stormy Israel. Okay. Sarah in Montreal, welcome. Many. And Tanya Silverman in Portland, Oregon. All right. An apropos name for what we're doing. Many's in Israel and Tel Aviv. Hello. Okay. Does the soul experience trauma? Is it affected? The divine soul. Now we know, the human or animal soul has negativity to it. It is, after all, an embodiment of klipa, a shell that covers over the divine. Therefore, it has its own whims and desires that it wants in life. But the divine soul, that's a part of God. What happens to it? Does it experience trauma in this world? So what is trauma? Well, trauma is being affected in a way that makes a very indelible mark upon us. Today, trauma is coming out much more than ever. And it's an important topic. So let's back up a moment. We're talking about when we do something wrong. We go against what God created us for. We're created for a purpose. And if we don't fulfill that purpose, then there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect from my true being. I'm not revealing it. There's a disconnect from the divine, a disconnect from God. In that moment of doing something wrong. Now, how we try to fool ourselves is into thinking, I'm not really disconnected. If I do something terrible, then that's a real disconnection. So what we need to do is make a distinction between the act of something wrong and then the consequence of what we do. In the act of doing against the will of God, what God created us for, and by the way, what does it mean to do against the will of God? Well, for a Jewish person, there's 613 mitzvahs, positive and negative commandments. And for someone who's in Jewish, there's 7 Noahide laws. That's what it's based on. And within that, there's many tributaries, many areas that covers in all relationships and all matters of life. So when we talk about the consequence of doing something wrong, so then there's a hierarchy. There are things that are much worse and things that are not as bad. So for example, we see that in punishment, that's how you can tell the consequence of something. Meaning, like in life, certain things, as a child, the parent would punish more severely than something else. Right? There's small things and there's big things, and that makes sense. So likewise in Torah mitzvahs, there are big things that there is the idea of what's called kores, which means spiritual, a spiritual death in the sense that the soul will have a shorter lifespan in this world, or death by divine agency. These are all from heaven. And then there's other things that you missed a prayer. So that is much lighter, shall we say, the consequence as a result of that transgression. You forgot a prayer. You forgot, in other words, the blemish on the soul, which is the consequence of what a person did. There's distinctions. There's an array of distinctions. And again, just getting back to the punishment is not per se for the sake of punishment, but it's for the sake of cleansing. As when a child plays in the mud and it gets dirty, and then the mother or the parent puts him into a hot tub with not scalding water, but hottish water to get things out, to cleanse, to take a scrubby and to scrub out the dirt, comb out the hair from all the sand that's there. It's painful. So there are things that are painful to the soul that needs a cleansing. And that's the concept of punishment in Jewish teachings. It's not, God forbid, that, eternal damnation. It's a cleansing process. So something that is more severe, the blemish is greater on the soul, it needs more of a cleansing. But that all is about the consequence of what somebody does, and therefore there's a distinction, right? We see between when a child says something that is like, something that might be embarrassing, the adult says the exact same thing. It's much worse. It's much worse. Right? What's worse? Because it's an adult that said it, so therefore the blemish upon the person who said it, that, inappropriate thing, is a greater blemish on that person's being, on that person's soul. Therefore needs more of a cleansing, as opposed to the child. Child, you're not expecting the same responsibility, the same awareness, and therefore the blemish is not the same. Not just by way of metaphor to appreciate the blemish upon the person when we do things that are not right. We say things that are embarrassing to another, for example, right? But that's all the consequence. And just as a reminder, we are so programmed to look at life as mere a consequence. I do this is what the consequence is. I do that is what the consequence will be, right? And the reason we're programmed that way, of course, is because everything in this world is cause and effect. So we see everything as a cause and what its effect is. And that makes sense. That's part of the human condition. And Torah speaks about it and therefore makes a distinction between, murder and, and embarrassing somebody. Although embarrassing somebody is considered spiritual murder, right? But it's not physical murder. And therefore there's no death sentence. Might be a spiritual, as we spiritually take the blood, embarrassment means you take the blood out of them, right? The blood rushes. In any case, point being, those are all consequences. However, there is something that's not about a consequence, but is a direct cause when we do against the will of God, when we allow the spirit of folly to enter and to confuse us and to think that what I'm going to do is not separating me from him in the moment of doing it. Not eternally separated, no, but in that moment, separated from God. The vitality that I get is not directly from him. It's from Klipa, Sitra Achar, and we're even worse because we're subjugated to that negative force. So the negative forces are in control of us. And we've lost control. But the important point over here is in that moment, we're disconnected from God. The Alter Rebbe gives he says that this is no greater exile for the divine soul that is now being completely incarcerated through the sin, through the transgression, through the wrongdoing. It's taking a soul that comes from the highest of the high, and it's now bringing it to the lowest of the low. It's taking the soul that its root is in the divine wisdom of God, and he and his wisdom are one, and plunging it, that soul, that divine soul in me, into the lowest of the low. And he gives here a metaphor. And the metaphor is, imagine taking the king, the head of the king, which is analogous to our divine soul, analogous to our divine soul, and dragging it and dipping it into a place of filth, into the toilet bowl. That's a huge humiliation for the soul. Now, you just do it for the moment. Then you bring it back because the wrongful action or words or thought was only for the moment. So it's not like you're keeping it there. Just in that moment, afterwards, you went back and learned Torah. You went and gave charity. You went and did good. So no longer is that. But the fact is that this is what's happening. That's the ultimate disconnect. The ultimate exile, incarceration of the soul. So metaphorically, that's a very powerful, mindfulness that this is what we do to ourselves, to the divine in me, in the moment. That's not about the consequence and the blemish. We're not talking about the blemish now. The blemish is the consequence of what we do that takes a cleansing process to go through, which is part of tshuva. That's even after 120 years also cleansing, but that's not the point here. The point is that whatever blemish that comes as a result is something that can be dealt with, can be healed, can be cleansed. Again, the child playing in the mud, and the consequence of that is, a cleansing process. So that all can happen. And therefore you can make, the dirt go away and the person and the person shine again. However, in the moment, what's happening to the soul, which is interesting, that the soul in the moment of the sin is in perfect faith with God, perfectly connected with God. At the same time, we are taking that part of me and putting it into this place of filth, right? An excrement. Again, only for the moment. It's only for the moment. But in that moment, it's a powerful moment that has a lasting effect. And is that trauma for the soul? Of course, in the moment it is. But the beautiful thing about it is that it's trauma in the moment, but yet it's not its true reality. So it doesn't remain. The blemish remains. That's the consequence, the cleansing. But that moment, it's not the true reality of the soul. So it doesn't live with it for good. Meaning it doesn't become its reality. It doesn't become its truth. Because it's not its reality, it's not its truth. Just in that moment, it's been exiled. It's been affected in this negative way. Which I think this might teach a lot about trauma that we speak about today so prevalently, that people go through. Now, I'm not here to speak as a therapist, and it could very well be that a person needs therapy. I'm not saying not. But is there something you can do yourself? I would suggest yes, based on what we're learning over here, is that you recognize that there was a moment that's traumatic, but just as the divine soul, that it gets it like the king's head put into a place of excrement for a moment, just for a moment, right? Just when that negative thought came in, or not came in, when you ponder, entertain the negative thought, or when you say something that is not appropriate, you're taking your divine soul and you're putting it into a place of filth, or your actions, right, that are inappropriate actions, raising your hand, God forbid, to hurt somebody. I only use that example because it's very simple, it's right here. But there's other things, of course, we do in actions. So what you're doing is to that divine soul that is got a hidden love for God and only wants to be united and connected with Him and never be separated, not even for a moment. And when we stray from that and we allow the spirit of folly to enter and bring us to a point of disconnect, it's very painful for the soul. Yeah. So trauma, the body remembers. Does the soul remember? Even if it does remember, it doesn't make that its reality. Its reality is connection. Its reality is the love and the bond with God. Its reality then is just good. Doing just good as a result. So the trauma doesn't define it. And likewise in our lives, if when we have a traumatic experience, is that a disconnect in that moment? Absolutely. Should that define us? Should that become our reality? So we're so emotionally attached to what happened that it becomes so real that that's what we live with. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't think if it's even the truth. Emotionally, that's what we're feeling, that I understand. But if we can talk to ourselves and come to an awareness, and hopefully allow that awareness that we choose that this is my reality, is that of the soul, that of the deeper good of my being, of that I am an embodiment of the divine, and that's my true reality. So then the trauma that we experienced will not be so defining of who I am, if at all. I think that might help. Just a thought. Again, I'm not suggesting here, person needs help. I'm not suggesting not. Just giving a different angle that I don't think is usually thought of. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Joseph, are we punished for our sins during the course of our lifetime? If we could, yes. We go through suffering. That's why when we suffer something, and it could be small even, it doesn't have to be big, right? It could be you lost your phone. Well, for some people, that could be big. I almost thought I lost my phone today. So that could be big, but let's say a small suffering. So there's people would say kapara. It should be an atonement. I lost something happened, so it should be an atonement, meaning a cleansing for something I need cleansing for. Yes, there is very much that idea in this world that the hardships and difficulties we go through is part of a cleansing process. And when we recognize that when we go through whatever we go through, that it's part of a cleansing process, it makes it much more easy to bear the pain. And then the pain doesn't become suffering, because you choose not to suffer because you recognize that this is something that is healthy for you, in the sense that it's cleansing. And when we think that way, it helps us refine ourselves through that process. Own the things we need to own, and change what needs to be changed. Fix what needs to be fixed. Davida, does our observance level have any relevance to the damage of the stain that we put on our garments? Yeah, of course it has, right? The less you observe, that means the more disconnect there is. Right, the more we engage in negative thoughts, erotic thoughts, negative thoughts about loved people, loved ones, the more we engage in, speaking negatively, ill about people, lashon hara, the more we, eat things we shouldn't eat, like non-kosher, do actions that are inappropriate, forbidden actions. So the more we do that, of course, the more we're creating disconnect. John, if we sin by driving a car on Shabbos to save a life or a fellow Jew, must we leave the car medical facility until the Shabbos is over? Very good question, John. Yeah, some of the details. So the Torah tells us that it's in the interest of Shabbos that you should desecrate the Shabbos in order to save someone's life. Because this way, desecrate one Shabbos, but you'll keep many Shabboses as a result. So yes, the law is that we desecrate Shabbos in order to save a life. And even that desecration should be done not by, if you need to call 911. So I do that in the synagogue, as opposed to, tell a younger person or a child to do it because then the message would be, saving a life is important, but not the most important thing. But it is the most important thing, so therefore, to show that, to demonstrate that, I'll make the phone call on Shabbos to 911 or Hatzalah. Now, it's happened before that, no, I don't know if I ever did that because I took taxis. But what happens if you have to take a car to drive somebody to the hospital, to save a life on Shabbos? So if you're part of Hatzalah, so then you can drive back because you might have to help another person. You need to be prepared for that. If you're just a private person, so then it becomes a little more complicated in what you have to do. That you don't drive the car back. There's even a question about stopping the engine, right? Because that's all part of saving a life. Driving to the hospital is about saving a life. Turning off the ignition, it's not about saving a life. You say, well, yeah, but someone might steal the car, or so, or it's gonna, all the gas is going to be depleted. Okay, that's an issue, but Shabbos is a greater issue, or greater importance. Yeah, so that's part of the nuance. Good question, John. Isn't suffering different than punishment? No. Just like punishment is for cleansing, suffering is also for cleansing. They're both the same thing. Happiness is what in Hasidic life. Joy is about connection. And we know that we have an opportunity that we can connect to God. That brings us great joy. We're going to learn more about that in the coming chapters. So we'll get there, Joseph. Or rather, Robert, we'll get there. Lynn, are there levels of Gehenna? Yes. Spoke about that previously. Gehenna meaning purgatory, cleansing process. Yes, just like, what a person needs to be cleaned. Sometimes you just need some warm water. Sometimes you need some hot water. Sometimes you need a scrubby. Sometimes you need, a steel brush. All those things are just a metaphor, right, to bring out the idea of cleansing. Julia, what about the suffering as a consequence of, for example, someone else inflicted harm upon us, not because we sinned? Aha. Okay, so that's obviously something separate from our discussion here. Someone, has done something painful to you, right? Maybe taken something, stolen something from you, maybe has said something to you that is painful, hurtful. So we could take that if we choose to, we could take that as a cleansing, and therefore see it as an atonement. Excuse me. We could see it as an atonement. That's part of the cleansing process. Is someone said something to me, and if I could see that in that way, it really is phenomenal, because it allows you to rise above the pain and to see it as a process of cleansing. That would be very healthy and good. We're really healthy. Julia, excellent question. Excellent. All right. Beautiful. All right, folks. Rambam is coming up. Oh, Wind 2. How can we let go of guilt and shame? Excellent question. Tanya Ray. Excellent question. We hold on to a lot of guilt, and that creates a lot of trauma too. Yes. So we've dealt with that in TRC. We'll deal more with it in TRC. Tanya Ray. It would be wonderful you join us. Okay. But excellent. We'll bring it up. All right, folks. Rambam coming up next on Zoom, 770-770-6085. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad.Chabad, Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you, Tanya. Have an amazing, wonderful day.